Good morning. Welcome to Camino. I'm really excited to be with you while we're doing this. We're bringing to you a interview with a personal friend of mine. His name is Ryan Sero. He is a paid writer, and he works doing mostly theater. But he talks about writing and the pitfalls that people fall into, as well as some of the great exercises and disciplines that you need to have as a writer. And because our process here at Camino is to help you grow as a writer and help you to bring your stories to life, I thought it would be a great opportunity to bring him on board. So let's jump into this conversation already in progress. Perfect. So, what have you been working on lately?
The last big project that I just finished working on was the Toronto Passion Play. So I wrote the Passion Play for Arthur this year.
Yeah. How did that
Yeah,
go?
it went super well. Yeah, I was so happy with it. It's one of the rare times that I have gotten to see my stuff because normally I write stuff and then I'm in it.
Okay, yeah.
That's typically has been my journey as a theater maker. Has been I write something for like a little indie show, then I do the show. I'm paranoid that nobody else will do the show the way that I want to do the show, so I am in the show. And
Does that
I
help at
did,
all? Like when you're in the show, do you maintain some sort of creative control, or do you just like you're in it? You just hand the reins off to a director, but you're still
so yes and no. Like in the past, most of the way that I've worked has been that yes, I will get a director. Very rarely will I try to be writer, actor, and director at the same time. And if I do, it's with very specific projects.
yeah,
And the specific projects are, it's not like projects that I care about more or less. It's ones that I don't need an outside eye for. So the last few that I've done that for, where I'm all three, have
yeah,
been like these very, very goofy, not quite sketch comedy, but like something in that vein where I'm like, it just has to be funny. I know what it needs to be. Like I
yeah.
don't need, a
It
director
doesn't
to
mean it doesn't need that ultra realistic view. It
no.
just needs to have people laugh, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like very, very, very much for fun. And so I don't really need them for that. But I typically try to get a director if I can. And I absolutely pass the buck on to them. Now, the other aspect to that that comes in there is the way that I like to work is where everybody's collaborating together.
Yeah,
So if an actor says to me as the writer, if they say to me, look, this line is awkward, I will change that line or I'll let them modify the line.
yeah.
I usually let my actors improvise if they want to. I reserve
Why?
the right at all times to say, don't say that, or no, that line really needs to be this, but I will let them do that. And in the same way, while I do have a director and their word is ultimately the law, it's the final say in anything,
Yeah.
I've gotten to work with people and I find people and ask people to direct who are open to collaboration and who are open to that dialogue because it's no fun. It's just such a drag when there's one person just like this is the way it's going to be and you're going to
Yeah.
go stand over there and then you're going to say this line and you're going to say it this way and eventually you're like I think you're looking for a puppet.
Yeah. So when you are giving the actors that much freedom, and I mean you're an actor
Yeah,
yourself, so you
yeah.
understand a bunch of this. But when you give that actor some freedom, what are the advantages of that? Why is that so important to you?
The importance, it has to do with what I'm trying to do. So the importance to me as a writer is I've got this story, I've got these themes. It's not so much that I care about the lines, if that makes sense. I do. I slave over the lines. I take immense amount of pride in working very meticulously with the lines. But if I'm writing realistic dialogue and it doesn't sound realistic, and this person's like, this doesn't sound realistic in my mouth, I really don't care about the exact phrasing as long as the sentiment is clear. Um, there are certain phrases that I will where I'll be like, this is the main theme of the show, and if you don't say these words in this exact order, I'm going to be mad. But like for the most part, there's some stuff. I'll give you an example. If I'm writing dialogue and two characters sit down and the one goes, so listen, how are you? And there's that stammer. Like if I've programmed that stammer into and the likes and the uhs and stuff like that into the dialogue, I really don't care where they go. What I'm indicating is I want this to sound like a real person talking,
Yeah.
and real people don't talk. And that depends on the script too. Some scripts I'm a little bit more regimented about it, and it depends on what I'm doing. And the other thing is, most actors don't abuse the privilege. They don't start changing every word. If they started going around and messing with every single word, I'd probably start to get annoyed. But if they just put the stammers in a different place, I don't care about that. If they want to rephrase things, I don't care about that. If they have a cool punchline and they want to try it out in rehearsal, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
They can try it out, they can play. And that's the other thing about theater. I guess film it does apply as well, but like with theater, in the rehearsal process, it's different than on stage. So if they're messing around with stuff during the show, I'm a little bit more like, we should be doing what we rehearsed. It should still live, it should still breathe, it should still be in the moment, but you kind of out of respect for your actors,
Yeah.
the other actors on stage, you don't want to be improvising too much because they'll do that. But I like to keep things loose. It depends on the project. Some projects are much more regimented where I'm like, no, it really does need to be exactly this, and others I'm looser
So
about it.
what are your thoughts on writers that are a lot very, very picky on what their actors say?
That's fine.
Where do you think that comes from then? Um yeah.
It's the same thing. It depends what they're trying to do. So if I'm trying to create realistic dialogue and they want to mess around with it to make it sound more realistic, that's fine. They're accomplishing what I want to do. If I'm writing something that's poetic and has very specific metaphors in it, then I won't let them improvise. And there are some other people that won't do that, and that's fine. They should reserve that right because it's what the writer's trying to do. And to me, the writer is the bedrock that everything else is getting built on, right? It's the foundation. That writing is so you can, if you're building that house together and the writing is the, I usually compare it to the blueprint in the metaphor, but we'll use foundation today. If they're the foundation and the foundation gets poured, what you want it to do is support the rest of that house. And so the actors are coming in and putting in walls, or they're putting in whatever other, the plumbing or whatever the metaphor for the actor part is. That's fine as long as that foundation is solid. Well, if the foundation has to be a very, very specific thing, then that's what it's got to be. If the foundation it can shift this way or that way, then that's fine too. And so it depends on what people want to do. If I've written something, more poetic with Shakespeare, if you have kind of a Shakespeare thing where you're going a bit more for the poetry and stuff like that, you can't allow people to mess around with it because you've got a meter, you have rhyme, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Now is the winter of our discontent does not make sense if you start saying different things. If you start saying, if you just put it in bold-faced terms and you say like the war's over and we're all happy now, it's like, okay, that's technically correct. That's the sentiment that Shakespeare's conveying. But it sounds so much nicer when he says, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, which has a pun in there because the son of York is the son of the king, the house of York, and the sun is out, and there's in the winter sun metaphor. And so like he's working multiple levels in there. Well, if you start messing around with that, you lose that. So you
Yeah.
can't do that. And if I've written something, not that I've written anything on the magnitude of Shakespeare, but if I've written something where I'm trying for that imagery, I'm trying for that metaphor, I'm trying for that poetry in any way, yeah, I'll be a little bit more draconian about it. So it depends on what I'm trying to do. And any writer that wants to do that is fine. And you can find great examples of both in amongst the great screenwriters.
Yeah.
You can find examples. Woody Allen is one who lets his actors apparently mess around with stuff. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Kate Winslet, I think, who in an interview was talking about it. And she was like, he's one of the best dialogue writers of all time. Why would I change anything? Um, but on the other end of the spectrum, you get guys like Quentin Tarantino, who apparently it's like everything has got to be exactly the way that it's written. And he stutters and he pauses. He doesn't let them mess with it. It's like, that's what I wrote. This is what you're going to say. And I think both approaches are valid. And I've kind of taken both approaches as a writer. It depends what I'm trying to do. It depends where I'm trying to be. I like to leave it a little bit looser so that the actors can play too, because they bring a lot of creative energy in as well.
I
So
know that when I was auditioning in Vancouver, there was a show. My mind is blanking on the details. I know it was a zombie show, but my mind is blanking on the rest.
yeah,
And I remember that when I got the audition for it, I went into the room and my agent sent me a message being like, "Hey," and she sent it to me like 20 minutes before the audition. I'm like, "This is not the right time to be sending me this text." Anyways, she sent me a text saying, "Hey, just so you know, this is the writer, and he likes every comma, every period is supposed to be exact. And I'm like, well, that wasn't my process when I set up. You should have told me this like a day ago or 10 hours ago, so I could have actually prepped. Um, but just having a writer's viewpoint on that is just, it's interesting. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. So when you're writing, like, who would you say is your like top people, like influences on your writing? Like, who do you love to read and
Um,
watch?
yeah, so that's a huge question because it sort of depends on what form of writing you're talking about, right? So like I'll have screenwriters that I enjoy very much. I'll have um, playwrights, I'll have novelists. I've mentioned Shakespeare a few times. It will come as no surprise that he's definitely up there.
Yeah.
Um, Stories are still relevant as long as people are jealous and prideful, and as long as people fall in love and act like idiots, Shakespeare will be relevant. But his it's not just that his major themes are big and are powerful and are always with us. It's the way that he phrased things. He just was a little cleverer. You know, I haven't read, I'm trying to think if I've read anything other than a couple of articles by Christopher Hitchens. But I remember in an interview, he was talking, or perhaps a panel show, he was talking about his writing process. And at some point, he said, if you got to the bottom of a page of one of his books and you turned that page and you knew the end of the sentence before you turned the page because he'd fallen into cliche, he said that would disappoint him. And he tried to avoid those cliches. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have characters speak in cliches. Now, the trick is people speak in cliches. So sometimes you feel like in order to be realistic, you want to give your characters those things. But I try to avoid it anytime that I can. I try to work a little bit harder at it. And I think Shakespeare did that. I think Shakespeare, when he didn't bother saying things a normal way, he found a more interesting way to say them. And that's why his poetry and his prose still it not doesn't just resonate on a thematic level, but it's just beautiful to read and it's beautiful to listen to. People get scared by Shakespeare, and they shouldn't. Yes, sometimes it can be a bit difficult to decode. Yes, there are cultural things that we don't understand anymore because the Renaissance was a very different time. Some words are used a little bit differently, but most of the words, I think most people would actually understand. Just take a little time to break it down to understand those metaphors, and some true beauty gets unlocked there. So he'd be up there.
I was always
Tolkien
told,
would
sorry, I was always
go ahead.
told with
Yeah.
Shakespeare that Shakespeare was meant to be watched, not read.
Oh yes. Oh
And
yes.
and you can and
Definitely.
it's so much easier to understand what's going on when you're actually watching actors live the part
Yes.
versus when you're sitting there reading it saying.
Yeah.
And to be fair, most of his writing that he chose to not use cliches became cliches.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and so when I put on Julius Caesar a few years ago, many years ago now, I suppose. And it, I think there's four or five cliches that we get from there. Like, Beware the Ides of March is in there. Et tu, Brute, of course, most people know. Friends, Romans, countrymen. The fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. So at
Yeah.
least five. I feel like there's at least one or two others. Oh, it was Greek to me. If you've ever heard somebody say like, "Oh, that's just it's Greek to me," that's from Julius Caesar.
Yeah. So like it's just amazing that because the best writers would change culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Go ahead.
no, like it's but it's true. It's like the best writers change culture. And the beauty of that is when you're writing, you're not expecting to change culture. You're expecting
Yeah,
to embody a story. You're expecting to embody like in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, you're expecting to embody love.
yeah,
In I think Hamlet, I think it's revenge. Like but it's all of these um you're embodying it, but and because those are always going to be around, those sentiments,
Yeah,
those emotions will always be around as long as we're around. The
yeah,
cliches will stick. I
yeah.
mean, and maybe not everything he wrote became a cliche, but I mean, I would be shocked if it was less than 30 things like that everybody in North America or the English speaking world
Yeah.
uses Shakespeare without even knowing it.
Oh, they absolutely do. They 100% they use it with, and I think it would be hard to find somebody who didn't use cliches by Shakespeare. To be or not to be, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Like we've said something, even
Into
in
the
joking.
breach, dear friend.
Into the breach, yeah, is a terrific one. So yeah, something has been said by pretty much everybody, and it comes up again and again. I think that it's that the cliches become cliches because they're so good, everybody repeats them,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, why did the jealousy is a green-eyed monster? That's perfect. Why would I need to describe it in any other way? Thanks, Bill. Right?
Yeah.
You know? And so you keep doing it.
Yeah. I love that. I just like, and we could go on with Shakespeare for hours and hours and hours because it's
Yeah,
timeless. It's amazing. But I want to kind of get into more like because we've talked about obviously Shakespeare is a heavy influence on you, obviously.
yeah, yeah.
But like let's talk about screenwriting. Like what screenwriters are you sitting there going, man, that person is I will rewatch anything they do.
Right. It's a pretty big list. It's actually, I mean, there's other playwrights and there's other prose writers, but sticking even just to screenwriters, it's a pretty big list. The Coens spring to mind, Joel and Ethan Coen. Woody Allen's one of my all-time favorite writers. I think he gets people in a way that a lot of people don't. Um, and it kind of bugs me when people are like, "Oh, he just does the same thing over and over and over again." And I'm like, "Really? You can watch Annie Hall, Zelig, Bananas, and Midnight in Paris and say that was the same movie four times? I don't think so." Um, yeah, just the wit, the power, that the understanding of humans and how like goofy and stupid we are. It's kind of like PG Woodhouse. Like if you've ever read like a Wooster and Jeeves book.
Okay. No, I
Um
missed that.
so that's he wrote the Wooster and Jeeves. Bertie Wooster is like this upper class British twit, perpetual bachelor man child sort of character, and his long suffering, wise, crafty manservant Jeeves is always getting him out of problems with very, very careful, wily applications of logic, and it's very farcical. It's very, very funny, and Woodhouse understands why humans are stupid and
Yeah.
puts it on display in a wonderfully amusing way.
Love
But yeah,
it.
the Collins, Woody Allen, Billy Wilder for sure, uh, was an amazing screenwriter. Like everything he did was quite beautiful. Those are probably the top screenwriters, but you know, dozens and dozens of others. Go for all the cliches, Quentin Tarantino, and just whatever.
Yeah. Aaron Sorkin, all of them. Yeah.
Aaron Sorkin for sure, yeah. And
Yeah.
and this is the other thing is I will forget them, and as you bring them up, I'd be like, oh yes, also that guy. That
Yeah.
guy's amazing too.
Aaron Sorkin is like, and I have a whole bunch of them, but I think Aaron Sorkin is my top because like it seems like
Yeah,
everything that he's ever written on screen, it's fun to watch. The dialogue is witty. The
yeah,
storylines are hitting hard. Like I remember one of my favorites is a very little watched show HBO series called The Newsroom with Jeff Daniels
yeah,
leading it. And I
yeah,
remember sitting there for the first time and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such amazing writing. And this was before I really knew who Aaron Sorkin was. Like I knew Aaron Sorkin
yeah.
because everyone talks about him, but I was never like paying attention to this as a movie he wrote. And
Mhm.
then I watched like the first scene and I was hooked. And then
Yeah,
from there I watched all three seasons. And by like the first is by far the best, but
yeah,
all three of them are so good. And I sat there, I think I've now
yeah,
watched it like 7 times, and that's the most that I've watched any series besides maybe Stargate. Um, but I just love that. It's just when you have a good writer and you know who the good writers are, you don't have to waste time on the rest. And that sounds terrible because I'm a big fan of having new screenwriters
Yeah.
and having new stories come across, but your standards should be high. They should never be lowered to culture standards.
I get annoyed when I see movies with terrible scripts. And I get annoyed because good scripts and bad scripts cost the same. Like, yes, hiring Aaron Sorkin is much more expensive than hiring some kid straight out of school. But like you can find an unknown writer with no price tag on their name and
Yeah.
you can buy their script for scale and have a brilliant script. And so there's this thing where like I watch movies, and they're trying to be good movies too, because every now and then you see one and you're like, you tried to be a B movie. Like nobody is faulting Snakes on a Plane for having crummy writing. They came for the crummy writing.
Sharknado is my favorite.
Sharknado. Yeah. I don't watch a lot of those
No,
like
nor I.
deliberate B movies. They're fun and they can be a lot of fun to watch with friends, but I sort of feel like life is short and there's a lot of really brilliant movies out there, and I don't really want to spend my time watching something ironically or hate watching something. I want to spend my time watching good things.
So I
Um,
used to do this thing with my best friend, and we were teenagers at the time, so we thought we had all the time in the world, right?
yeah.
And so we would challenge each other to find the worst movie we could possibly find and watch that movie. And we would force each other to go through these terrible movies.
Yeah.
And I bought this movie from for 79 cents from a Video Express at the time,
Yeah.
and it was called Evil Alien Conquerors, and it was a few people from Saturday Night Live just making a really bad movie, and it was intentionally bad. It was so bad that it was funny.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like I sit there. I don't think I've watched a movie like that. I've never intentionally watched a bad movie
Yeah.
in probably 20 years now.
Yeah,
Because,
it's not as much fun. I mean, it can be fun with people, like as a social thing where you're all making fun of the movie together. But yeah, I just rather watch a really great movie.
yeah,
Especially now that I have kids and stuff, like it's like I don't have time to go to the movies. So if I do go to the movies, it's like a big thing. It's a big deal. Jody and I, my wife and I, watched the Robert Pattinson Batman movie in a
yeah,
shift. So like I went on like a Thursday and she went the Friday, right? Like,
it's bad, but I understand it. So we just had a kid, right?
yeah.
And since having a kid, my wife has been uber sensitive to anything spiritual or any kind of
Mhm.
shift in the home. And so it's like I haven't been able to watch a movie for the last year and a half because it's like the minute I watch a movie, and so we're we just bought a house and we're moving into a house, and our next door neighbors are going to be good friends of mine, and I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, I can show up at your house and we can watch a movie, right? Because watching movies were such a big part of of growing up. It was a big part of who I am because I
Yeah.
love the film and entertainment industry.
Yeah.
But there are things more important, as
Yep.
you have to be able to be picky and choosy at my
Yeah.
stage in life, at your stage in life. We have to be picky and
Yeah.
choosy to sit there and go, okay, I've got 3 hours this week that I can maybe
Yeah.
watch a movie.
Yeah.
Even though I love Zack Snyder's Justice League, I can't. That's not going to be my 3 hours. I want to watch something
Right.
that's actually worthwhile. And also, my wife
Yeah.
doesn't watch movies, so I can pick movies from my past. I just bring them up, and she's like,
Yeah.
"What an amazing movie!"
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Um,
and I get to share all of these with someone who's never seen them before.
yeah.
So,
Uh, yeah, I would say definitely make the time to see the movies. And that sounds weird because, yeah, as you point out, there are more important things than movies. But when I was fresh out of university, I was starting to think about like basically the importance of things, right? So everybody thinks their thing is super, super important. And it was occurring to me, I mean, it had occurred to me before, but I was doing some deeper thinking about it where it's like, all right, everybody seems to think that they're doing something really important and nobody else is. It's the thing where like, Plato and Socrates would be like, if anybody should be a king, it should be a philosopher. And it's like, how'd you get to that conclusion there, Plato? So I was thinking about what is the place of an artist because that's what I am. And there was a part of me that was like, it's kind of in some ways superfluous because you don't need it. Like on paper, you don't need it, right? You need things like food and shelter. So farmers and people who build houses are necessary. You need people to protect you. So firefighters and medical people and police, and you need people who, can teach you and impart wisdom. So the education system is somewhere up at the top of that hierarchy. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, if you have all the needs and none of the art, none of the actual culture, what you have is an anthill or a very efficient clockwork mechanism. And it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's getting food for the colony. The clockwork gears are shifting and turning each other. But outside of a functional point, so what? And if you don't have music and you don't have paintings and you don't have religious ceremonies and theater where you can get together as a culture and come together and share these things, these ways of knowing, these ways of being, you're not really a human at all. And so I would say take time to go to the movies and not just to watch movies on your laptop or your cell phone at home, but to go out and see them or to go out and see live theater or music. And I'm not a snob about this. Go to karaoke, go to sporting events. There's a lot of theater people where that unless you're seeing like the most important relevant, whatever other stupid eat your vegetables buzzwords they want to throw on it. Like they don't like when you have fun. They're like, oh, you saw a farce? Well, I saw a one-person slam poetry show. It's like they're both valid, they're both wonderful. Go to either one. I'm just saying, participate in in the thing that humanity does and make time for that. And yes, that might sometimes mean you don't go to the movies because you have family obligations, but family's part of being human too. So I'm not saying not. I'm just saying there is an importance in what is perceived as the frivolous because it's part of who we are and it's what makes us different from ants.
I love that. So going off of that, why is it that you're a writer? What is it that drives you to be a writer?
I think some of it's compulsion. Some of it is I have to tell the story. And I don't know where that comes from exactly. Um, I would characterize it as a spiritual impulse that this is, one doesn't like to get too uppity, but like, there is sort of a God gift there. I don't want to say, I'm some kind of prophet or anything like that, but I think that this is something that uh, has been put to me to do. So that's a major reason. It's just things that's the biggest impulse is that there's this compulsion inside. I think it's part of the spiritual realm. I think it's part of who I am. And I think that it is important to tell stories, to share stories, to connect with people, um, to do that. And there's nothing like it.
I love it. I love it. And I agree with you. I think that writing is not as much of a compulsion for me.
Yeah.
I love writing, don't get me wrong. But for me,
Yeah.
I write for a purpose. I sit there and go, hey, I want to tell this story and I want to
Yeah.
sit down and write it. But it's
Yeah.
not like oh my like I know people that are like, oh my goodness, I just went through a breakup, I gotta go write something. And I'm like, and a lot of
Yeah.
people use it as processing more than actually are telling a story for a purpose.
So I have, although I don't usually, if I'm writing for processing, it's going into like a journal or something like that. I very rarely write poetry. When I do, it's something that I want to express for me. I think I've shared like two of them with other people. Like I
Yeah.
have no interest in publishing them. They were things that I wanted to express that every now and then I go back and read. So that's kind of what you're talking about, that processing thing. And that processing sometimes finds its way into a play or a script, a film script later. But when I say the compulsion, it's what you're talking about. I want to tell this story. I just feel like it's sort of like been put into my brain and it should come out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's not, that's what I mean by compulsion.
Okay. Okay.
I think we're talking about the same thing.
Probably. Probably. We've got different terminology, but
Yeah,
same. I have come across that so much living here, where I have a terminology from the prairies, and now that I'm living in Eastern United States, I'll say
yeah,
something, and people will be like, "How dare you say that?" And I'm like,
yeah.
"What did I say?"
Yeah. That actually some of the best is terminological problems over time because things develop particularly in an innuendo quality
Yeah.
that they did not have um years and years ago. You've probably seen the meme of the Joker. There's like a comic strip and he's like reading a newspaper and he's like slamming his fist into the newspaper because he's frustrated. And the headline is something like um the Joker's boner or something like that. Because pulling a boner used to be in like the 40s and 50s, it was like you made a big mistake, you really screwed up. And so there's all this like boner dialogue in the Joker's sex balloon. He's like, they think that was a boner, I'll show them the boner. Like it's like, and it's just, and in 1952 or whenever this was published, I don't remember, but like whenever it was published, this was like he was like, they think that was a screw up, I'll show them a screw up. But it doesn't read like that anymore.
Yeah,
And so
now we're gonna get a lot of people going out and searching. What is the Joker talking about a boner?
I guarantee you, even with what I am aware will can search engines can return back. Like even though I'm aware that an innocuous term can often lead to something horrible, I am pretty sure that meme was popular enough that that combination of words will actually produce the meme and not anything horrible. Initially, I do not make any guarantees. If you Google long enough, you will find things you don't want to see. But
Well,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
that meme will certainly come up.
So,
Uh,
so I would love to know a little bit about your story because I know we've talked about this before, but this would have been years ago because I've known you for what, 5 years now, 6 years ish, give or take.
Oh,
We talk periodically, not a lot, but we talk periodically.
I thought it was longer than that. I think you're right, though. I think it is about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
No, yeah, they would have to be six, right? Because we first met. Was it just five? Because we met working on the Nativity musical,
Okay, if that's
right?
the case, if that was the case, then it would have been five because we never actually did that play.
No, no, we did the Nativity one. It was the Easter one that shut down. It was
Oh, okay.
the Passion play that shut down.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. Because it was we were. I remember being in the at the rehearsal room, and then someone came in being like, "Hey, we're in lockdown now. The play is officially canceled." And I was like, "You got to be
yeah,
kidding me! My whole
it
life
was.
is now gone."
Well, I was living in Hamilton, and so it was kind of funny because like they did it at rehearsal.
Yeah.
So I drove, you know, 45 minutes in to Etobicoke and we sat there for like 15 minutes and then Arthur and a couple of the other people from the church came out and were like, it's locked down and the musical's off. We've made a hard decision. And I was like, I feel like this could have been a phone call, guys.
Well, I remember being at the rehearsal with Catherine and Delia, and I feel like a couple others.
Yeah.
And I was at the rehearsal, and I was sitting there because I was there for a long time because I had the day, and I was just helping around the church. And then Arthur came in and be like, "It's canceled," and we sat there on stage, being like, we were on the stage, looking at it, being like, we were only like a month away. Like, could we
Yeah.
not have not locked down until like I don't know May?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but anyways, the question still remains: what how did you get started in writing? Like, when did this start for you?
Um, I think I still have little sheets when I was like 6 with these like terrible, terrible stories in this purple marker scrawled across the page. So I think it started early. At some point, I'm not sure exactly when, but like at some point I kind of figured out like, oh, things have writers behind them, right? Books, TV shows, movies, video games, like they have somebody's writing these stories. And so that was part of it, was that like, oh, that I would have fun doing that. But there was another aspect. I got into theater and performing arts because of largely because of Monty Python. And when I was about 14, as most 13 or 14-year-old boys do, I discovered Monty Python. A friend of mine showed it to me, and I laughed my head off. And there was a part of me that was almost immediately like, that's a job. I would love that job.
Yeah,
Like just being ridiculous. And so the performer writer combination almost immediately coagulated as this thing of like, yeah, I want to do that. And then in university, because you can't really study, I'm sure that there's like programs or individual classes, but you can't major in sketch comedy, or at least you couldn't. Um, Maybe somebody's got one now. But theater is kind of the closest thing. And so like there was this thing where I was like, I'd like to write video games. I kind of want to do this like sketch comedy thing. And so like theater kind of brings you into that writing, acting place. So that's what I studied. Um, and then as a writer, I kind of didn't care what I wrote. So plays were the most immediate thing because it's a weird industry because it's a very, very difficult industry and very expensive and brutal and hard to get into if you want to do it at like the top level. Like if you were going to Broadway, you need millions and millions of dollars. But if what you want to do is rent a room for an afternoon and like put on a show with 3 of your friends, that's actually a very low entry fee. Like it's actually surprisingly a low threshold to do that. So, and it's lower than making movies with your friends, and it's less technically involved, right?
yeah,
If I don't know how to work a camera and do the lighting rig, and there's some people do where you'll see their like movies that they're making with their friends, and you're like, this looks terrible. And I don't mean like it's a bad story. I mean it's like none of you understand what a bounce board is. Like it's just like you don't know how to light a movie.
yeah,
And because you don't know and you assumed you did, your movie is now stuck in a quagmire in the valley of Dunning-Kruger, right? And you're just like, guys, come on. So but with theater, because you can do very imaginative things, you don't need a massive set. You can be a little bit more like, oh, this is symbolic of this. How many shows have you seen where like red silk is the blood coming out of somebody because that's what they could afford, right? They can afford one red silk handkerchief rather than the mess of fake blood all over the stage
yeah,
that then needs to be cleaned up. So you can be in that kind of unrealistic or hyper realistic world where things don't have to be as literal on stage as they do on camera, and so you can get away with a little bit more for a little bit less money. And
yeah,
so that became one of the primary outlets. And then I've done a few different things, not a lot of film, a couple of like little indie short film kind of things. I've done a bit of voiceover stuff. I wrote some audio drama scripts, but they never got produced.
yeah. You've written at least one movie of the week that never made it. So
Yeah, that hasn't made it yet.
yet,
It
but I would
hasn't made it.
still love to. I would still love to. That was such a good
Yeah.
script. Oh my goodness,
Thank
that
you.
was so much fun.
I
That was so much fun
I
to read.
appreciate that.
At
Yeah.
some point in time, I would love to release that for people to read, so that at least people can read it and be like, "Man, this was good."
Yeah. I have been thinking about it more and more. And there's a part of me that's like, I should get together with some people, do a couple readings and workshop it and beef it up and send it back out and see if anybody is interested in a bit of a revamp on it. Um, Boy, that central character was. It's weird. I don't remember his name anymore. It's been too long since I read it.
I
Um,
remember that. I remember the whole story in a whole, and I remember what it was based
yeah,
off of, but I don't
yeah,
remember the character's name. I just, do you
yeah.
know what I remember? Do you know what I remember out of that script? There is
What?
this scene where the character is running around with a vacuum cleaner,
Yeah.
trying to, and I can't remember what exactly he was trying to do. All I remember is sitting there and having this picture in my head and thinking, this is the
Oh,
most hilarious thing I've read in a long time.
he. You know what? I remember that. He's frustrated. It's near the end of the script. Spoiler alert for this movie that
May or may
uh,
not come out in the future.
never will happen. So it doesn't matter. Anyways, but it's near the end of the movie. He's confessed his feelings for the girl. She has is waffling on him, so she's not sure she wants to, and so he's frustrated and angry. He's finally coming around on Christmas as a wonderful thing instead of a thing that he hates. But he's frustrated, and he winds up knocking over the urn with his father's ashes in it. And then he's just like, oh. And he goes and he gets a dustbuster and he like vacuums up the ashes. And then I'm trying to remember if it's right away or if it's a little bit later, but shortly thereafter, he goes to scatter his father's ashes like from the rooftop as like the snow is falling at Christmas, and he turns it from suck to blow, and he's just like, and it's just coming out of this dustbuster off of the roof of the building.
But that's what I remember out of that script. And I remember that there was like, now that we're talking about it, there was the whole story about the store and all of that stuff
Yeah,
where the guy was selling
yeah,
Christmas but he didn't actually believe in Christmas. All of that kind
yeah,
of stuff.
yeah. For the
But it was the dustbuster that when I think about that script, it's the
yeah,
dustbuster that really made it for me.
yeah, it's a guy who for the viewers, it's a guy who hates Christmas. His father owns one of these Christmas every day of the year stores. They just sell Christmas stuff all year long, and he inherits the store and he hates it. And then he hires an employee to help him deal with this Christmas thing because he doesn't want to, and falls in love with her. That's the plot of the movie. And making him as cynical and angry as possible and her as bright and happy as possible was a lot of fun. There's one morning where it's her first morning on the job. This is what the one of the first things that springs to my mind when I think of it. It's her first day on the job, and she's bright and chipper, and she's looking forward to being here like nothing else because she loves Christmas. So she wants to be in this store, and he hates it. And she's got two coffee cups, and she hands him one. But because she's this bright, happy, bubbly person, it's like warm eggnog. And so when he goes to drink it, he's like, "What is this?" And she tells him it's eggnog, and he just gets this angry look on his face. And then he literally walks into the middle of the street and just puts the eggnog cup down in the middle of the street with cars like honking at him. He doesn't throw it. He carries it into the middle of the street, puts it down, and like just walks back. He just leaves it for other people to deal with.
But okay, so as we're on this topic, I love, like, how many times when you're writing do your characters surprise you? Like, does that ever
Quite a
happen
bit,
to you, or is it
yeah.
one of those things that you just like, oh, hey, this would be really cool if, and you write it?
So it's more that while I'm writing, yeah, surprises do happen. Um, I haven't phrased it that way in a while. And again, it's more of a semantic thing. I try
Yeah,
not to be one of those writers, and this is just more of my personal feeling on it. I'm going to sound grouchy and curmudgeonly myself right now, but I'm not one of those people that's like,
don't.
oh, my characters are talking to me. They're the ones who really come up with the plot. I'm like, but it's actually coming out of your brain. It's just coming quickly out of your brain. And so it sort of seems like this. I know what they mean, and I don't think they're wrong. I think that they're correct. And I've had the same thing. And I've said the same thing when I was a much younger writer. I just, at some point, I felt like, and I want to be clear about this, it felt pretentious for me to say it.
Yeah,
I don't think it's pretentious to say it. A lot of writers say it, and I don't think that they're being pretentious. But for me, it felt inauthentic and pretentious for me to say it.
yeah,
And but yes, I get surprised while I'm writing, um, typically with jokes and humor, spring up, and I laugh my butt off. I did a parody of Romeo and Juliet that I ran a few times at the Hamilton Fringe. My first writing session on it, I sat down to try to like crack this thing and stared at the blank page for a few minutes. And eventually I came up with the opening line: two households, both alike in dignity, walk into a bar. And I was like, that's funny. And that was all I wrote that day because I was like, I can't, this feels so perfect that I can't. And then I had to come up with a joke later that worked with it. And it actually, there were several jokes that wound up coming.
I
But yeah, so yes, they surprised me. Um,
What is the favorite is that one of your favorite things that surprised you? That kind of took you off guard when you wrote it.
yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite days, if only because I knew that like if I continued to write, it was going to all be downhill from here. So like sometimes you write and you get like 20 pages, and sometimes you write and you come up with two households both alike in dignity walk into a bar, one half of which is Shakespeare's. Like, but but um but I kind of knew. I was like, no, 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 I accomplished that today, and that was enough. And it feels weird. There's, if anybody is winds up listening to this podcast who has a real job, and they're working on electrical wires or something like that, they'll be like, "What? You wrote one word and you think that's a good day's work? Get out of here with that!" But like, there's a great line. I won't remember the exact words. There's a great line in Mad Men where Don Draper is trying to he's talking to some accountant guy. I think it's Doc Phillips, and he's like, "Why are you spending so much money on pencils? And they're not doing anything. They're just your creatives are just sitting out there." And Don says something like, "The reason why our creatives are sought out above the big guys is because we give them the time to do nothing until they are productive." And that's not the exact quote,
Yeah.
but basically, and I find that the writing process is very much like that, where it's like writing can be staring at a wall for 6 hours and then writing down one idea and then going away. And some days it's really, really hard, and some days it's really easy, but the process doesn't look normal, and it shouldn't look normal. It should look like whatever it needs to be. Now, I also think it should be disciplined. In my writing practice, I try to set aside specific times of day to do it. Writing for about an hour, hour and a half. And if nothing happens, that's fine. Like I don't kind of put the pressure on it, but like it's got to happen. I believe you have to do it every day, even if it's just a little bit. I believe you, and I mean, I'm not saying like every day draconianly, like somebody's gonna, if you miss a day, then you're not a real writer or anything like that. But I think that it has to be disciplined. I don't listen to music when I write. Some people do, and it works for them, and that's great. I would encourage any writer, and I have encouraged writers in the past to at least try it because I used to listen to music when I wrote. I used to put on music to like get into the right mood, the right vibe space. And then I read this essay. It was a visual essay. It was a cartoonist, and he'd drawn it as like a comic strip. And in it, he described meeting one of his heroes, and he was going to get to work on, I think, an animation project, but I could be wrong about that, with a an illustrator that he really liked. And he was looking forward to asking this guy a ton of questions. And right at the top of his list was, "What music do you listen to while you work?" And the guy's response was, "I don't. I'm working." And I remember reading that and thinking, huh. And the rest of the essay talked about this guy trying it and finding he was much more productive. And I thought, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try it. And I tried it, and I was much more productive. If your brain has nothing to do but stare at a blinking cursor on a screen or a blank page with your pencil hovering over it, and there's nothing else going on but your thoughts and this white void that you have to fill, it'll get bored and it will fill that void. And I think that for me, and again, every other writer, they have their own processes, they have their own materials that they let some use longhand, some on the computers, some will be talking into a little box and transcribing later. All valid. But what works for me is making sure that there's discipline involved. I find that that helps my writing practice. And I think that I have a suspicion that for some writers, and I've refused to name names, but for some writers, when they say things like, "Oh, I put on music and I play video games until the inspiration hits," I'm like, I think you're procrastinating and you've fooled yourself into thinking that you're writing. Um, and I think I would at least encourage people to try a couple weeks of like a very disciplined writing practice
I
because
know that
otherwise it's easy to get off track.
I know that for me, I when I wrote my first feature film, I wrote it to the Bittersweet Symphony, and
Yeah,
I put that song on repeat because that's the feel I wanted for the film.
yeah.
Um, it was probably the worst script I've ever read. Probably the worst script I've ever written,
Yeah.
and it's the only script I've ever listened to music while doing. Um,
I
and
would I would
I'm not saying the music was the problem, but what I
I
am
don't think
saying
I
is that the characters aren't allowed to grow and live in my mind when I've got music going.
right.
For me,
Um
it's the music gave such a tone that the characters weren't allowed to break the tone.
yes. They
When I
couldn't be
had
their
the
own.
music going, they couldn't be their own. And like some of my favorite moments I've ever written
Yeah.
were written to silence.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then the only thing you're only focused on what the story is.
Yeah.
I will say, if you want to a particular mood, I still often will listen to music for 5, 10 minutes and then write. So I would put on Bittersweet Symphony 2 or 3 times and listen to it. And then my script might have the verve that comes with that.
Yeah.
But, and for those of you who don't know, Bittersweet Symphony is performed by a band called The Verve.
Right.
Um,
It's just such a part of who I am. That song
yeah,
is so part.
it,
Like you could put the first two notes of it, and I'm like, it's bittersweet symphony. The verve
yeah,
done.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so you can listen to music. I mean, it's your writing practice, do whatever you want. But like I will listen to music before writing and then write because it kind of can set a tone or can set a particular mood. Or I might take a break in the middle to listen to music and then come back to it or something like that. But the act itself, and I don't usually like to do that either. I'm only writing for an hour to 90 minutes.
yeah.
So that was taken. I watched John Cleese talk about creativity, and one of the things he talked about was setting aside a time to play because you need to kind of be playful when you're creating, and so you need time to kind of get into that space, and so you can sit there. And he's like, and you can't. It's hard to maintain that for a long, long, long time. So he said, an hour and a half is probably plenty. And I have found, and this will change from person to person, but I found that generally speaking, that's about the creative window. And after that, you need to take a break and go do something else. And I recommend something physical. I was working on some writing one time and nothing was coming. And I was like, all right, I'm just like, I feel stiff and lethargic. That can't be good for my brain. So I put on my shoes and I hit the ground running and I ran as fast as I could until I couldn't go anymore. And then I turned around and came home and I sat down and things were flowing a lot better. Um, if your body doesn't work, your mind doesn't work. It's all connected.
Yeah.
Take care of your health, get your sleep, eat your vitamins and vegetables, drink your water. Um, I mean, I'm a hypocrite right now. I definitely don't always do those things. There you go. I ate vegetables this morning. So, but
Proud of you.
my point is, if you maintain not just for writing, but for goodness sakes, just generally be healthy. But writing is harder when you're not healthy because you won't be in a good headspace. You won't have clear thoughts. You'll be filled with stress and anxiety. You'll hold tension in your body. So making sure that you take time to be physical, and it's especially important for something like writing, where it's very easy to sit hunched over a desk all day or lounging on a couch with a notebook in terrible posture, just like scribbling away. And it becomes very, very easy to to not give your body what it needs to be healthy. And if it isn't, then you don't always notice this, but when you go to write, you just feel crummy. And if you're like, ugh, if you're thinking about that pain in your shoulder or in your lower back because you've been doing this all day, well, you're not really thinking about your story then, are you? So,
Yeah. Yeah, and to me, that focus is so important. It's so
yeah,
important.
yeah,
I'm not gonna lie, when I sit down and write, I'm generally, and this is something that I've been like lately, I've been doing shorter periods because I've got family and I've got other obligations. But when I was single and in Toronto, I would sit down and I would write, take a week off, write a feature in a week, 40 hours, generally 4 10-hour days.
yeah,
And that's how I would write. And I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie, I never reached. I liked the stories that I wrote when I did that.
yeah.
I didn't love the stories that I wrote when I did that, and now I'm trying to find a new way to do it.
What was your outlining process?
My outlining.
Yeah,
So what I would use is I would use the Zack Snyder's beat sheet from
yeah,
Save the Cat, and so
yeah,
what I would do is I would make sure that every one of those were clearly defined.
yeah,
So I knew exactly who these characters were, and
yeah,
I would name a person. So if I was writing and I just finished talking to you, and I'm like, oh man, that if Ryan was this character, and so I would actually make you that character, so that as I'm writing, I would sit there and go, okay, this character would do this because Ryan would do this.
right,
And
yeah,
so once I had the beat sheet and then I had all of my characters written out, I would just
yeah,
try and find the most interesting ways that these characters could get from point A to point B.
yeah,
And that's how I would write. And so technically it would not be planned,
yeah.
but
So,
it was planned and outlined, if that makes
yeah,
any sense.
that doesn't sound too bad actually. And most of the time when people are like, this isn't working, I'm like, well, did you outline? And they're like, no, I just, this is another common writer cliche. They'll be like, I just like to let it have flow. And I'm like, you're gonna wind up with an act one that is three times as long as it should be, an act two that is rushed and hurried, an act three that is almost non-existent and wrapped up in the last page.
I
Like,
was
yeah,
Yeah, I
you're
was talking to a producer, and he was telling me that he gets sent. I think he said he gets sent like 15 scripts a week or something like that. And he's just like, I can't read them all. And
no.
but he was like, he's like, my number one thing is I read page 12.
Mm,
And if something happens on page 12,
yeah,
then that's my first test. It's all I have to do is read one page, and I can look at that page and I can see should I continue reading the script or not.
right. Yeah,
And probably about 70% of them I can just throw out because nothing happens on page 12. And I know that on page 12, that's where the hero journey needs to begin. And,
yeah.
oh, I thought I just tipped over my water. I just hit my cell phone with my hand.
Uh,
Um, but no,
yeah,
I don't stick like if I've got that outline,
yeah,
I don't strictly stick to it.
yeah,
I sit there and go, okay, if it says something has to happen on page 25, if it happens on page 24 or 26, I'm not worried about that. But what I
yeah,
don't want to see is it happening on page 36 or 46.
yeah,
That's what I don't want to see it happening. And so, and when I learned this, I started very strictly. No, something has to happen, and this is what's going to happen. The theme has to be stated, and this is how I'm going to state it. Like boom,
right.
boom, boom. And I don't do that much anymore.
Yeah,
Um, because I feel like the creativity needs boundaries, but
yeah,
creativity sometimes needs to break those boundaries in order to actually
yeah.
create something important.
Yes, I agree with everything you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
that, yeah. And I I believe that the more you practice and learn things like plot structure, the more you will understand where you can deviate from it and have it still work.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think a lot of deviations work. So that's number one. And when I see people talk about it, where they're like, oh, this movie doesn't follow plot structure. And then you look at it, you're like, yeah, it does, but it's got like a messed up timeline. So you think that it doesn't. But the beginning of the story is still like what they're confusing the beginning of the timeline with the beginning of the story. And you're like, no, no, no. A flashback doesn't change where we are in the story. The flashback is still like the middle crisis point. It's just anyways, so I think the writers need to understand structure. It's another one of those things where like it's very easy to trick yourself into being like, oh, I'm this, kooky, quirky artist, and I just feel the universe gives me things and I translate it into the page. And it's like that can work, sure, but I think you get better results if you try to apply a little discipline and technique. The other thing is there are multiple structures. So there's the classic, three-act Hollywood structure that everybody learned from somewhere, whether it was Sid Field or Robert McKee or somebody else entirely. I also enjoy Save the Cat. Um, it gives good discipline there. There are other plot structures though. There was one I have not tried to implement it yet. It's a Japanese one, and it's the uh, Kishen Kotetsu. I think I'm right about that. And each one of those is there's four moments, and there's like the setup, and then there's like a deepening of the characters, and then there's like a massive plot twist and a resolution. It's kind of like an O. Henry story structure almost.
Okay.
If you think of like the Gift of the Magi.
Okay.
Right. So it's like that. It's more that. So it's less like building to the plot point one and then the midpoint and then plot point two and then the climax and then down.
Yeah.
And it's more that it like comes along like this and then goes up. So like there are different. The story circle is one I've used a lot. Dan Harmon's story circle
Okay.
is very useful. A lot of them go to the same place. Like it's just different ways of thinking about it more so than it is an entirely new structure. Sooner or later, you are going to have to acknowledge the fact that when you start the story, nobody in the audience knows who the characters are. So you have to tell us who they are. And at the middle of the story, we want to see things getting a lot more chaotic and committed to the plot line. And the end of the story has to be the most exciting, tense moment in the thing. You can, I suppose, put the most intense, important, stakes heavy thing in the middle of the movie, but the last half of your movie is going to be weird. It's going to feel slow. It's not going to be entertaining and engaging. So, I don't know what to tell you. Now, that doesn't mean like the big battle scene has to be at the end. The big fight, it doesn't. So, how much do I want to spoil? I don't think this is a spoiler. The movie Heat, probably the biggest action scene in Heat is not the final action scene in the movie, right? Like the big bank robbery scene in the movie Heat is the biggest one, but it's not the most dramatic one because the most dramatic moment in that movie, this is definitely not a spoiler. It sounds like one, but it's not. The most dramatic point in the movie is whatever the final confrontation between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro has to be. And it's not a spoiler because one's the good guy and one's the bad guy and they're the biggest names in the marquee. And you know that it has to come down to them. I haven't given away what they're doing or how they go about it or what the climax is. That would be spoilers. But for goodness sakes, if Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are the good guy and the bad guy, we all know that has to be the final scene in the movie.
Everything does. Like there's like you go to the movies to see the good fighting the bad.
Yeah,
That's the point. If we have a
yeah,
movie and they don't fight, we're like, where's the sequel?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
we're expecting a sequel because that's it's gotta come to a head.
yeah. And it took like a decade for M. Night Shyamalan to give us the sequel, Unbreakable.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
more than a decade.
when you see people writing, and what do you see as the biggest mistake that they make?
Uh, I, we've covered it. Plot structure. The biggest,
Okay.
what I consider the biggest mistake is people that are writing too much by the seat of their pants. They're not getting into the discipline and the craft of writing. So I know a writer and she managed to circumnavigate it somehow. I was talking to her about it and she was like, "Oh, I didn't structure it." And uh, I read the manuscript and it's a wonderful book. It's published now. Um, A Grim Reaper's Guide to Solving a Murder. Her name's Maxie Dara, Maxiedara, Maxie Dara. And it's a very funny, clever mystery book. And she was like, no, I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to structure. And she managed to do it somehow.
And it was interesting.
It's a great book. I very much enjoyed reading it. I have a copy in my like tote bag right now. But yes, but that's I would say that's rare. Most of the time when I see people with script problems, they have not paid any attention to structure and it shows.
Yeah.
And it's because that sucks. Like writing dialogue is fun as a writer. You're coming up with witty lines, little moments of poetry, big speeches that you're like, it's going to be fun when this guy says this speech. That's really fun. The drudgery is when you sit down and you're like, all right, I have this theme. I want to talk about love. And it's a huge topic, and I got to distill it into an hour and a half or 2 hours of script.
Yeah.
And that's not a lot of time. And it would be great if my characters didn't just say I love you a lot and send each other little hearts and in the mail or, emojis or whatever, because that seems very bland and boring. It would be much better if I had a movie where love had to be expressed whispering at a balcony because you're worried that her family's going to catch you and kill you
And if
in
only
Romeo and
someone had
Juliet.
done that before.
Yeah, sounds pretty good. If nobody has, I'm gonna do that one.
Yeah, that's
But
on my list of things to do next.
so yeah, you're trying to figure out ways to do things that are clever and interesting. And it's hard to do that because so many people have come before you, and it's hard to avoid the cliche. But and structuring is not fun because it's almost math, right? It's not really. At some point, it's not really story. It's what you're talking about, where you're going along, and you're like, okay, um, page one, I'm going to introduce this character. By page five, I want the major theme laid out. Page 12 is the big conflict. Page this and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. So then I'm going to slot these scenes in. And it starts to feel very mechanical. And artists don't like that. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like feeling like what I'm building is some kind of math driven machine, but it is.
Yeah.
And
Well,
my job as an artist is to find a way to express that mechanic in a way that you don't realize you're watching a wind up toy.
yeah.
And where it actually means something. And you can do it. I'm not being cynical about this. I'm not saying, oh, every story is just this stupid little structure and it doesn't matter. And the hero with 1,000 faces means that stories don't really matter. No, I'm saying stories deeply matter. And if you break that structure, you have a big problem and you need to pay attention to that structure because otherwise the major themes and the art and the poetry and the humanity and the communication and connection that you want to happen isn't going to happen. And it's not going to happen because you couldn't do some math.
There was my dad is a musician, great guitar player,
Yeah.
blues guitar player. And he always said something to me. He's like, there's jazz is a really, really great piece of music. But every one of them know every scale that they can do. They know it inside, outside, upside down. And when they break those scales, which
Yeah.
they do way too frequently, when they
Yeah.
break those scales, they are doing it intentionally and they are doing it for a purpose.
Yeah.
And if you are creating a script and you are breaking a structure and you're not doing it intentionally for a purpose, then you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
If you
Absolutely.
but if you do break it and you do break it intentionally and for a purpose,
Yeah.
then it should be it's like when we're filming a scene and we break the line and there's that
Yeah.
180-degree line, all the cameras are on this line and the cameras don't go. And if you break it, all of a sudden
Yeah.
it'll actually make their audience be like, what's going on? And
Yeah.
if you understand
Uncomfortable.
how breaking it will affect your audience,
Yeah.
then
Then
you
you can
can
do it.
break it
Yeah.
and you can actually and it's a brilliant piece of writing. But
Yeah.
if you don't understand it, don't ever
Yeah.
I don't break the structure because there's some piece of structure I don't understand. I know it works. I don't understand why it works yet.
And 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 mostly it shouldn't be broken. It's actually rare that you do want to break it. There are a few movies and stories that do, but it's very rare. And most of the time, you're going to get a better result by sticking to the structure and being creative with how you're presenting that story structure. That's going to be what matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You got me thinking about jazz music now.
Oh, yeah.
And,
So
uh,
but jazz is because to me, jazz is the least fun music to listen to because there's no flow to it. It's
oh, I
like,
love it.
oh, it's the least fun for me because I love blues because it's so like And
Yeah.
then when someone comes in with jazz and it's like ding, 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 and you can't understand because
Yeah.
there's no, they're out playing
Yeah.
outside of the key.
Yeah.
And it's not always. It's just I'm just not used to because jazz is not my forte.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
I mean, first of all, like it really depends on what you mean by jazz, because like there's a big difference between Thelonious Monk and Louis Armstrong, right? Like Louis Armstrong is much more structured.
what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about writing?
The most misunderstood
Yeah,
thing.
what people think is like the most biggest misconception about writing and writers.
That in order to be one, you have to have this, dark, tortured soul. In order, you have to be, struggling with your trauma. I mean, you can. I don't say that, that's not possible, but I think good writing comes out of people who have that talent, who develop that skill. And I think that a lot of times there's a huge correlation because people do use it as a way to express things that are hard to express,
Yeah,
which often means that the people that feel the need to write do have something very, very dark in them. Um, but yeah, and it's one of these things that I find a bit dangerous because there's the uh, temptation, I think, for a lot of writers to be like, oh, well, I don't really feel it yet. What if I, do a lot of drugs? What if I drink a lot of booze? What if I, you know, ha I should be mentally scarred to be a writer? And it's like, no, you don't have to be, and you shouldn't seek it out. You can certainly use writing to process it if there is trouble in your life, but if you're lucky enough to not have much of that, then don't find it.
yeah,
Yeah. So I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. I think the maybe bigger, but certainly close in magnitude would also be the it's a similar image, isn't it, of the tortured genius cradling his head in his hands or her head in her hands until inspiration strikes, and then in a sudden flood of writer genius, they transcribe an entire work of amazing art overnight. And to me, it's that discipline. It looks much more like pecking slowly away. Like you were talking about writing, not being satisfied with writing a script in a week, I think you said.
yeah. Where
And,
I used to
and
write scripts in a week all the time, and I had to find something
yeah,
new because it wasn't healthy.
I yeah, I can do quick writing like that, but I find that most scripts, somewhere between 1 month and three, is what you're looking at. And that's not me trying. That's not me being like, how fast can I do this? Or, how long can I take? That's just like from soup to nuts when you get the concept in your head and you sit down and actually start trying to do this, from working out the plot structure, coming up with character backstories, doing a second draft on the plot structure, starting your first draft, getting feedback, doing whatever. If you stick doggedly at it, plugging away at it, at most more days than not, it'll be between 1 and 3 months.
Yeah,
And it is not long periods of nothing followed by massive. Again, for some people it might be, and certainly there are times when I sit down and it flows easier. But
yeah, yeah. I know that for me, I love writing true stories. And I find
yeah,
that for me, well, because then I know exactly who the people are, and it just
yeah,
builds for me. It's like it's so easy because
yeah,
I'm not casting them; I know them,
right, yeah,
and it's so much easier for me. But that's not always the case. Like, I'm actually in the middle of writing a story about a superhero at the moment,
nice.
which no one's ever heard of one of those before. Um,
Sure, yeah,
and it's like, but and that's this is one of the first songs in a while where it wasn't based on a real story because I just love the true stories. I just love them. I think they're amazing. Um,
yeah,
but yeah. So yeah, I that's real. Oh, one more thing. One more thing I wanted to
yeah,
ask you.
yeah.
You're talking to yourself at 18, and you need to say, beware of this and do this. What are those two things?
Okay. The thing, hmm, To do this is easier. I'm going to give you two
Okay.
because they're about equal importance. The first thing that I would say would be much more deliberate and focused in networking. So instead of just going to kind of random places, I would have told me to seek out specific places to be and make sure I was in those rooms. Um, it's networking's tricky because you can't go in with the agenda to network or people smell it on you. You have to go in with the objective of just meeting and talking to cool people. But that is what networking is. But you do have to be in those rooms. So I would have been like, make sure that you go to the film festivals, make sure that you go to the whatever, make sure that, that kind of thing. So that would be one. The other thing that I would tell me to do is to say, it's something like, don't think of yourself as a script writer or even an entertainment writer. Just think of yourself as a writer and just go looking for everything because there's journalism, there's blog posts, there's prose, there's poetry, there's all kinds of stuff. And a few years ago, I started like trying to be more intentional about that. And I've wound up doing some interesting writing. I did some writing for a while for the Investing News Network. So they had me covering the Australian Stock Exchange. So this is not something that I ever envisioned that I would be able to do. But it was a way to make a little bit of money doing some writing and learning about things that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was a ton of fun. And if I had been like, oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm a screenwriter, I'd have missed out on that job. I'd have missed out on that opportunity. And it didn't interfere with my artistic practice. It was just an additional thing that I could do. So those would be the two do's. The other one was something I could avoid.
It was something that you would say, beware of this.
Um, I would say I think I'd say beware of comfort, just doing the same thing over and over again. I think I would say it will be easy to get stuck into like, oh, I'm going to write another one act play. We're going to do it at the Fringe. We're going to do and you kind of get into that routine. And that's similar to what my last point about like broaden your horizons on what kind of writing you can do. It's the same thing, but from like the reverse angle where it's like, because if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're spinning this wheel instead of going and finding new places to be a writer. Um, oh, there's other things. Yeah, there's other
There's always
advice.
going to be 100 things, but it's what I'm
Yeah,
looking for is the one on the top of your head
yeah. Those
because
those are the things that came to the top of my head. There's just yeah, there's a ton of stuff that writers should know.
do your kids enjoy writing?
My oldest, Pippa, um, I was going to say my oldest daughter, but she is also my oldest child in general. Yes, she writes. Every now and then she'll bring me like a little comic book that she made. And it's really fun seeing her do that because like they suck. Like you know,
You're a great
from
father. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
from from the objective point of like, if you put this on the shelf at a comic book store, would it sell? No. Like, but it for what she was doing a month ago, it's amazing. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
So
I
it's just
understand it. Well, it's like my daughter.
yeah,
My daughter is just
yeah,
learning to speak.
yeah.
I get so much joy from her going, I dad you.
Mhm. Yeah,
When I tell her I love you, and she's like, I dad do. And it's like, I
yeah,
know she's trying to say I
yeah,
love you. Is it
yeah.
pronounced properly? No. Is anyone else
No,
gonna understand it? No. But
no.
it gives me so
But
much
you
joy that I've got that communication with her.
and
And it's probably,
yeah,
and I'm guessing it's the same kind of thing. It's like, is it going to sell? No. Are people going to understand
no.
it? Probably not.
No.
But I am super proud of what she's doing.
Well, because she's improving,
Yeah.
and I can see the seeds, right? So it's not that she draws a bunch of pictures of like, you know, superheroes doing random things. Like it has a plot, it's not a good plot, but it has a plot, right? Like so, but that's huge because of what we were talking about earlier, right? It is so much harder to teach somebody how to create plot structure than it is to teach them how to write dialogue because dialogue writing is fun. So seeing her do that, I remember there was one time in the Hamilton Fringe I don't remember the show's names anymore, but I saw two shows in one evening and they had the opposite problem. And the problem with the first one was uh the individual moments were interesting, but the plot was just a big blob. It didn't go anywhere. The characters weren't nothing about it. The other one, I didn't often like what was going on in the scenes. Like some of the dialogue was kind of clunky. It didn't really, work that way. But the story structure was there.
Yeah.
And because the bones were good, I remember thinking one rewrite and that would be a great show. Whereas the other one, you basically have to tear it up and throw it out. And so what Pippa's doing now with these little comic books and things like that, they're not they're not polished comics that would be sold in magazine stands, but I can see the seeds of storytelling starting, and that is something. And that is fun to watch, and it's fun to watch her develop, and it's fun to watch how much better at it she is today than she was last year. And I can remember the first she put on a play for me at one point, and it was just her standing in front of me explaining all the characters' stories that she'd come up with, like their backstories. It was basically just like 5 minutes of exposition dump about six different characters she'd come up with. And, I put an enthralled look upon my face. But so seeing her go from that to an actual structured story in this a comic book she handed me last week was very cool. So yeah, that's
Do
neat. So
you
she
do
likes to write.
do you remember the first story that you wrote?
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, okay. So I alluded earlier to I think I still have the pages somewhere of like this like notebook in school,
Yeah.
and it was like to do some journaling and to do some story writing and things like that. And so I do recall, and it was very similar to Pippa's first attempt at making a play, in which I basically was just introducing characters after characters that amused me. And it was just like, it was a fantasy story with magic and swords and things like that. But it was mostly just that I wanted all these character archetypes to kind of be together because I thought that was cool. And every now and then I'd be like, oh no, monsters. And then they fight the monsters and win. And there was no story structure at all. There was no plot. It was just like, do you want to come go on an adventure with us? Yes. And like more and more people just joining this little rapidly expanding band. Yeah.
Yeah. I always like when people talk about the first story because I mean I remember I think I actually still have my first story I tried to write. I tried to write a novel.
Yeah.
And so I grew up and I was infatuated with Hardy Boys, Bobbsey
Yeah.
Twins, Nancy Drew,
Yeah.
all of them. And so I created one I called the Frontenac Brothers because I was Canadian and the Frontenac was
Yeah.
French. So I figured why
Yeah.
not make it French and Canadian?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it was maybe I only really got 2.5 chapters in maybe.
Yeah.
And it was like I remember reading it probably 2 years ago with my wife, and I'm like, oh, this is bad. Like it's like I'm like I
Yeah.
just it's like what you're talking about where it's like it's these characters thrown into these situations, but every page there was a different situation that they had to get out of. Like one there
Yeah.
was a tire rolling down a hill in order and they had to jump out because they didn't see the tire and they didn't know who put it there. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like there's no point. It's like it fell off of a car. It's like come on.
Yeah. And actually, that would actually be a very funny parody of like a Hardy Boys book would be if it's the central detective kids and they're like always like this is a mystery and people around them are like no, a car went around a corner too fast and the hubcap came off. Like you idiots, like everything is not like gonna tie together. Like you guys are dumb. And just this whole book
That
about
would be so funny. Where it's like there's
people.
no mystery at all. Every chapter is just
Yeah,
a misunderstanding.
Yeah, and then the central detectives are trying to tie it all together because in the way that like the A plot and the B plot eventually become the same plot by the end of the book, and
Yeah,
Philip Marlowe has to solve both of them, and in solving one, he solves the other one, that kind of thing.
yeah.
So it'd be the same thing, but they aren't interconnected because life doesn't work that way. And so they're like, stop trying to like the no. First of all, nobody stole any money from the cashier's till at the supermarket. It was just a rounding error, like the cashier just screwed up the till. That's not a theft. Second of all, the flower pot that got knocked over at Mrs. McGillicuddy's across town is not a connection. It's not that the thief like smashed the flower pot while running away with the money from the grocery store. Like none of this is connected. They're just individual incidents.
A cat
It just
jumped up and knocked over the
yeah,
pot.
it's totally unrelated, you guys. It has nothing to do with anything. And they're like, it's got to be something. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that'd be very funny.
That's really fun. Well, I
Yeah,
want to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a lot of fun talking to you,
yeah,
catching up,
yeah.
and really kind of digging into to how you think and why you do what you do. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.